Students often forget that the term external respiration specifically refers to the gas exchange that's happening across the respiratory membrane in the lungs. Some textbooks or sources might call this alveolar gas exchange. It doesn't matter what you call it. What we're doing here is exchanging gases across that respiratory membrane. Gases in the air, like this oxygen here, are going diffusing into the blood. Of course, what's in your alveoli is not yet in your body. So that's why we might call this external gas exchange. When your red blood cells pick up that oxygen and bring it to your tissues and drop it off, that's called internal respiration. Atmospheric air contains almost all nitrogen and oxygen. But there are some other gases like carbon dioxide at smaller partial pressures, and that works in our favor. The air in an alveolus is almost all oxygen and carbon dioxide. If you were to stand here with your mouth open, do that right now, nobody's looking, gases would diffuse down their gradients into and out of your tissues by passive diffusion. The rate would not be enough to keep you alive, but the process is actually happening. Recall from the section on blood that hemoglobin is contained within red blood cells. In order for oxygen to be able to bind with the iron that is in hemoglobin, little molecules, little oxygen molecules, they have to travel through the respiratory membrane of the red blood cell and into the plasma. And then from the plasma through the erythrocyte cell membrane and into the cytoplasm of the erythrocyte. Yes, 1, 2, 3. Here in external or alveolar respiration, we're taking deoxyhemoglobin and turning it into oxyhemoglobin. From the previous section on blood, we know that deoxyhemoglobin has a very dark reddish, almost purplish color to it, and oxyhemoglobin has a bright ruby red color. And these colors are created from the bonding of the iron in the hemoglobin molecule with oxygen. So just as metal rusts when it's exposed to oxygen in the air, the iron in hemoglobin does the same thing in changing color when it picks up that oxygen in external respiration. The respiratory membrane is the air-blood barrier. This is where items in the air must diffuse through the respiratory membrane and enter into the plasma of blood, and vice versa, opposite direction too. The respiratory membrane is made of the fusion of type 1 pneumocytes, which were also called alveolar cells, and the endothelium of blood capillaries. So in this picture, I seem to have a pretty good space here, but these type 1 pneumocytes are fused, really, to those endothelial cells. The fusion of these two gives them that one basement membrane through which gases have to diffuse. By fusing these membranes, it's a very small distance, but the distance through which the molecules have to move becomes less. And this is just one of the many adaptations that are present in the respiratory membrane to encourage the passive diffusion of gases, right? So the point here is not to use active transport and not to consume ATP. So let's look at this picture a little bit more closely. On the right side of the diagram is a blue capillary. And this capillary is actually the arterial side of the capillary bed. Here in the pulmonary circuit, arteries are bringing deoxygenated blood to the alveoli, and veins are carrying oxygenated blood away from the alveoli and back to the left atrium of the heart. This distribution of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the pulmonary circuit, right? Pulmonary circuit. It's exactly the opposite of the distribution in the systemic circuit. This also means that these red blood cells that you see over here on the right side of this diagram in the capillaries are flowing from right to left. The alveolus is lined with simple squamous cells, which are also known as those type 1 pneumocytes or alveolar cells. And they're responsible for being part of that respiratory membrane and diffusion of gases. This blue cell right here that looks like it has hair is something that's called a type 2 pneumocyte or a great alveolar cell. And what it does is it secretes surfactant. You can see a really thin highlight of surfactant all over the type 1 pneumocytes or alveolar cells. This is the surfactant covering that breaks up alveolar surface tension, or the tendency for this membrane here to just want to collapse on itself due to the surface tension or the cohesion of the water molecules that are there. So we have this also this alveolar macrophage right here, kind of like patrolling the area and looking for any pathogens that you may have inhaled, right? And we can also see up here the start of some columnar ciliated cells with some mucus cells scattered in between, right? And we don't want those things on the alveoli because we don't want the alveoli to be nice and thin. Absent from this picture are the many elastic fibers that are running over this alveolus. And it's these elastic fibers that are incredibly important in the collapse of this alveolus during exhalation. If you have ever opened a soda bottle, then you have experienced something called Henry's Law. Your tasty little soda, it has carbon dioxide bubbles in it, and then those carbon dioxide bubbles are pushed into your sweet sugary soda under pressure. So when you twist off the top of your soda bottle, a whole bunch of that carbon dioxide comes rushing out. And this is because there's a lot of carbon dioxide in your bottle, a high concentration, and there's relatively less carbon dioxide than that in the air, a low concentration. And so all carbon dioxide is doing with your bottle, it's just simply diffusing down its gradient, right? You left the cap open, and if you leave it open for a long time, all of that carbon dioxide, except very few molecules, will diffuse out of your bubbly soda and join the rest of the carbon dioxide molecules floating around you in the atmosphere. The same principle applies here at the alveoli, where oxygen is diffusing into the liquid of the plasma. So we're going from air to blood here instead of from wet to air. And carbon dioxide is following that example of Henry's Law. It is diffusing out of the liquid of the plasma, or your bubbly soda, and into the air. As we mentioned before, diffusion is a passive transport process. And what takes place here in the external respiration or alveolar respiration, in order for the gas to exchange to be efficient enough for me to oxygenate my entire body, this respiratory membrane has to meet a few qualifications. Number one, the distance that the gases have to travel, it's got to be small. And this is reflected in the fusing of the basement membrane to the type 1 alveolar simple squamous cells and the simple squamous cells of the endothelium of the blood vessel. right? So they need to be fused. Number two, there need to be enough total alveoli in that lung that is exchanging gases in external or alveolar respiration to oxygenate enough capillaries to serve the needs of my peripheral tissues. This means that your lungs have to have a lot of surface area per volume. As I mentioned once before, and if you read your textbook, they always say if you spread out the surface area of the lungs, you would cover a tennis court. I mean, my response to that is always like, yeah, okay, who did that? Who took a human lung and spread it out all to cover a tennis court? Number three, lucky for us, carbon dioxide and oxygen are both non-polar, lipid-soluble gases. And because of that, they're actually capable of just diffusing right through cell membranes of the simple squamous cells of the respiratory membrane. No transport channel is required. These gases are just able to push through and push in between the phospholipids in the phospholipid bilayers of the cells. Number four, which I mentioned before, if you were to stand here with your mouth open, oxygen would actually diffuse into your blood. Carbon dioxide would actually diffuse out of your blood. I mean, not enough for you to be living, but this means that these gradients are already established that allow these gases to flow in these directions. So think of the respiratory membrane for oxygen to diffuse into your blood. It has to diffuse into one of the type 1 pneumocytes or alveolar cells, and then into one of the simple squamous cells lining the blood vessel, and then into the plasma, and then into a red blood cell and bind with hemoglobin. That's a pretty complicated gradient. You have a couple compartments there. You have to set things up, right? That's not just 2 points in the line. There's a couple areas where you have to make sure that the gradient's going in the right direction. This concept, what I just described, kind of relates to another one that we'll talk about in another mini lecture. But number 5, for gas exchange to be efficient in your lungs, there's a concept called ventilation perfusion coupling. Basically, you do not inflate all of your alveoli with every breath, right? We learned that from spirometry. There's a residual volume that you're just not inflating with every breath. However, the alveoli that you do inflate, I have to be sure that there is blood flow in the capillaries surrounding those so you can exchange gases. There is no use sending blood to alveoli that do not inflate or are part of that residual volume during inhalation. Match your blood with your air. All of these concepts are explored in more detail throughout the respiration mini lectures.